all of you guys must have applied to, because you were accepted at UC Berkeley, right? Did anybody apply to any other UC school? Okay, Alex, what did you apply to?
UCLA.
UCLA, okay, you applied to UCLA. Okay, I'm glad you got here and chose this one. Who else applied to another UC school? Matt?
UC Santa Barbara.
Santa Barbara, okay. And how about another one? Somebody else. Let's get in the back, yes.
San Diego.
San Diego and
UCI.
UC? What? Irvine, okay. UCI, Irvine, and what was the other? San Diego? Okay, anyone else? Yeah. Davis, okay. And what else? Somebody else? Yeah.
UC Santa Cruz.
UC Santa Cruz. You see what I'm doing? Anybody else? There must be another couple. This is all we have. Okay, what other UC schools are there? UC Riverside. What else? Merced. There. That's. Oh, there's one more. You probably. What? Yeah, there's right. You wouldn't have applied to that because that's a medical school. Okay. Okay, why have I got them organized like this? Pardon? Well, there's not only just 4 letters, because that one's got a 3-letter one. Yes. Yeah. Pardon? Well, actually, you may. This is something that you should know. There was a long time when that was the University of California, right? And do you know what this one was called? Tell your friends at UCLA that was called Southern Branch. And this one was the Ag Station. And this one was Scripps Oceanographic Institute. That was it for a while. So they're not by age, but why are they divided like that? I got them right? Yeah, I did. No clue. Yes. Lindsay. Pardon? South to north? No. No. Yeah.
Could it be that some are named after people and others are named after?
Well, you're on the right track. Think about the names. That's what they're... Yeah? Yeah, sure. These are all Spanish names. And these are all English names. Isn't that interesting? Our university has more Spanish named campuses than it has English named campuses. And so that's the lead-in to what I want to talk about with you today. Would you like to go on a field trip? Yeah. Let's go on a field trip. Okay, so we're going to be gone about 10 minutes. And you can leave your things here if you're comfortable. Ryan and David will make sure the door's locked. If you have a computer, it might be good just to bring it along. We're going to go down the hall here, and there's an elevator if you need, or we're going to walk up to the 5th floor, and there's a balcony there looking out over the bay. You ready? Let's go see it. Okay. Here we are. Do come close, otherwise I'm going to have to yell real loud. Come in real close if you can. Thank you. Okay, so we're looking out at the Bay of San Francisco. So it's a Spanish name for an Italian saint. In Italian, that's San Francesco, right? And every place you look out here, there are Spanish place names. Can you see any places with Spanish place names? Yeah, come back to that. What else?
Marin.
Okay, there's Marin, the county of Marin. So that's the county by the coast, right?
San Rafael.
San Rafael. Okay, that's named after. That's over there. So that's named after a saint in Spanish. Yes, in the back. Who's that? Corte Madera. That's over there. It has something to do with wood. Huh? Right.
Yerba Buena.
Yerba Buena. Okay, what's Yerba Buena?
It's the little island That's Treasure Island.
And you can't quite see it because the eucalyptus grove is in the way, but Yerba Buena is over there, and that's really interesting. What does that mean?
Good herb.
Like good.
Good herbs, yeah, or something like that. Various kinds of herbs. But at any rate, there was. I think it usually means it's a plant that's kind of like mint, and there was an awful lot of that growing on what's now San Francisco at the time. So that was originally Yerba Buena, and that was not an important town in Spanish and Mexican colonial times. Where was the capital of California in Spanish and Mexican times?
Monterey.
Monterey, that's right. So that's out of sight over there. And so San Francisco had a mission in it and had some people raising cattle, and it was called Yerba Buena. And so when they decided to call it San Francisco after the U.S. takeover about 1848 or 49, it was such a nice name that they transferred the name from San Francisco out to the island. It's in the middle. It's the island that the tunnel goes through between the two sides of the Bay Bridge, right? But that place already had a name. It was called what? Anybody know? It was called Isla de los Alcatraces, the island of the seabirds, because Alcatraz is a Spanish name, and it's probably the origin of our word albatross. They're related to each other, right? Okay. So when they moved the name of Yerba Buena to that island, and that's such another nice name, Alcatraz, they decided that it's a shame to waste such a good name, so they put it on that island that's out in the middle of the bay. Isn't that interesting how there's histories of all these names, and there's Spanish names everywhere. Just out of sight over there is El Cerrito, the little hill, and there's we say Alameda down there. That's it's an island there. There's over there's San Mateo, and down there's San Leandro and San Lorenzo, and then there's another university over there in a town called Palo Alto, which is what does that come from? What is that?
High Street.
Yeah, high pole, or in this case, high tree. So it's referring to the tall trees. It's referring to the redwoods, right? I guess that's why their mascot is a tree, right? Okay, so now who knows about this name Alcatraz? It's a Spanish name, right? Anybody know anything more about that name? Because it wasn't originally a Spanish name. It's a borrowed name in Spanish. We have lots and lots and lots of borrowed names in English. Spanish has some. You know where it's borrowed from? What was the original language? Pardon?
Italy?
Not Italian. Portugal, no. Nobody's even close yet. John?
Almost anything with an AL beginning is the in Arabic.
Absolutely. So words in Spanish that begin with AL are almost always borrowed Arabic terms, right? And that's an Arabic word. And it means seabird in Arabic. So my question for you, is that a surprise to you? Yeah. What on earth is an Arabic word doing out in the middle of San Francisco Bay? And so that's what I want to take as our entree to explore in the rest of the class. So have one more look at this glorious sunny day. Every time we've done this before, it's either been about to rain or raining or something like that. But have another quick look, and then let's go down and find out why there's an Arabic word out in the middle of San Francisco Bay. Well, I really appreciate your not anybody knowing about that. Last year there were 2 Arabic speaking people in the class, and so my little surprise wasn't quite as good, but thank you very much. So, at any rate, let us use that as the sort of central question to explore today, because what I want to talk to you about is the Spanish heritage of California. This has been one of my little passions of interest since I was about your age, because it was kind of strange when I was in school. I had a Spanish last name, and that was sort of strange, and I didn't look like most of the other kids who had Spanish last names, and I was fascinated by it. My father wasn't, he didn't care, but my grandfather spoke Spanish with his father, and so it has always been a fascination to me. And why should you care? Well, that shouldn't make any difference to you. Here's why you should care. First of all, this is going to be an example of how to develop an initial thing like, why do I have a Spanish last name? Or the various topics that you guys have come up with. How to develop that over time into a really significant topic that you know a very great deal about, and that you find an almost endless source of inspiration for learning things. Okay, that's one reason. And the second reason is that almost everybody here, thanks Josh, almost everybody here is a California citizen, or at least a long-term resident. We live in a state that has a major Spanish heritage to it, as you see in the names of the campuses, and it goes deeper than that. For example, quite a bit of the law of the state of California is different from other states in this country, except maybe New Mexico and Texas, because we have a lot of Spanish heritage in our laws. Our laws are not the same as they are in many other countries. For example, in this country, if you have a man and a wife and one of them dies, if the man dies, the woman inherits all of the man's property. That comes from Spanish law, and it isn't the case in Vermont. It isn't the case in Wisconsin. And so a lot of the heritage that we live with on a day-by-day basis comes from Spain and through Latin America and through Mexico. So anyhow, maybe that's why it should be interesting to you. I will come back to this from time to time. I'll try not to overdo it, but I apologize in advance if I do. So let's take this first page and ask a whole lot of why questions about our state and its Spanish heritage. So if you start in the upper left, there are the campuses again, and clearly these names come because there are Spanish place names all over the state, as we just saw looking out over the balcony, and those come because it's the Spanish-speaking people were here before English-speaking people were, so most of the good place names got were given by Spanish speakers. So let me just ask you about a couple of places. How many of you from Southern California, LA area? Okay, so isn't there a place down there that's called something like La Cañada? You know that? I thought it might be called La Cañada Flint Ridge, or something like that. I gather it's quite an upscale place with very expensive homes and things. Okay, most people coming here from the east think that that's some deformation of the word Canada, but it's not. You know, what does it mean? Anybody know? Yeah, one meaning of it is dry canyon or something like that. There's a much more interesting meaning to it that we'll come back to, and that means it's a cattle trail or a sheep track. And that turns out to be really important, and I'll try not to forget to bring that back in as we come along. But another thing, is anybody here from the San Fernando Valley? Okay. You know what that's named for? No? Just a name? Okay, it's named for a saint, Ferdinand, right? And Ferdinand, you will see as we go on, was a king of Spain. And quite an important one, as you'll see, important enough to get his name onto a valley which subsequently became a really important part of this state. So what I want to do is to leave those as sort of questions for you. Where does La Cañada, where does that come from? And why San Fernando Valley? What lies behind these? This is all part of historical mindedness. Okay, so if we look back, I mean, I'm sure everybody knows here that this was a colony of Mexico, and before that of Spain, and there are the dates underneath Mexican California, Spanish California. So 1761, that's the date of the founding of the first mission in Alta California, well, the part that is now our California as opposed to Mexican Baja California. So the first mission was what? San Diego. Okay, so that was the first mission in Alta California in 1769. Why is the boundary there at 1821? What happened in 1821? That was Mexican independence from Spain. So that's when this stopped being a Spanish colony and became a Mexican colony, just because Mexico had achieved its independence. What happened in 1848? Why did it stop being Mexican California? Pardon? I'm sorry, I'm just not. Is that when it was? At any rate, it was when enough Americans from the east had shown up here, getting here by covered wagons, or some of them by sail ship around the Cape Horn, and the gold rush was just about to happen, and that was when this Mexican colony was annexed by the United States. Okay, so that's what lies behind those dates. Okay, so let's try and move back. You can see there's sort of a pale gray arrow circling around here in counterclockwise direction, and it's our track backwards in time as we try to think back to understand more about this state that we live in. So what were these people in California doing here, and why were they speaking a language called Spanish? Okay, now Spanish, everybody knows today, is a major world language. But 1,000 years ago, it was not. It was the dialect of a rather obscure and unimportant part of Spain called Castile. Basically, it was the dialect of a little town called Burgos. And so the question is, how did this minor dialect of an insignificant town in an obscure area become a major world language? You know, as important a world language as English or Chinese, or, I don't know, more important than French, certainly. How did that happen? Okay, so that's the kind of question we're going to ask ourselves. But when the Spanish first got here, they were not the first people who were here. There were Native Americans here before. Anybody know the name of the tribe that lived in this particular area right here? Ohlone. They were the Ohlone. And I think I mentioned this once before. There were one of their main sources of food was shellfish. What do you call them? Clams and things like that from the bay. So down in Emeryville, there used to be, I think it's all been removed now, there used to be something called the shell mound, which was just a huge pile of shells that these people had discarded when they finished eating whoever lived inside the shell. And so if you go down there today, you'll find there's a street called Shell Mound Avenue. Okay, so we will come back later in the course and look at how they got here. But the map in the lower left is showing some migration routes by which people starting in Africa, which is the home of all of us, the ancestral home of all of us, how they moved around and gradually migrated over the face of the earth. And you'll see the arrows mostly go up. The arrows leading to North America go up through Alaska. And what made that possible was that during the last ice age, which ended about 10,000 years ago, there was so much ice on Canada that sea level was lower, and you could walk from Siberia to Alaska. And people have known this for a long time, just because it was a reasonable hypothesis, and also on the basis of a little archaeology here and there. But there is fascinating evidence now coming from DNA, from genetic information about people. We all trace our heritage back to back to Africa, and the Native Americans traced theirs back through Siberia. So you can actually see the migration patterns are written in our genes, or written in the genes of different people. So we'll come back to that later, and that's a fascinating story. Were you going to say something, Ryan?
We're thinking about that that's not just true for humans, it's true for all sorts of things. Various species are all influenced by those glacial cycles, and in particular that's how we got the horse.
How we got the horse, yeah. Well, and there's another part of this story which is completely up for grabs right now. If you're interested in these things, this could be something you might end up doing research on as a graduate student. But you know, there were a lot of really big animals, some of them quite nasty and ferocious, in North America before the Native Americans first came, before, say, 15,000 years ago. Any of you been to the La Brea tar pits in San Francisco, in Los Angeles? Okay, that's a place where all these large animals that don't exist in North America now were trapped in this sort of sticky oil that came out. Or if you take a geology class and do field mapping, you'll go out there by the Orinda Tunnel, and my students out there have found horse bones and they've found camel bones from 5 million years ago. But when the Native Americans came, well, let me put it that, when the Spaniards came and the English came to North America, those things weren't here anymore. And they had all disappeared. There was a mass extinction of the large North American land animals that happened somewhere around 13,000 years ago. Here's in the lower right, we're down on the picture of the saber-toothed tiger, the Smilodon, and this is the picture. Some of you may have met him coming in that south entrance of this building as a sculpture of the Smilodon, the saber-toothed tiger there. But those guys were gone by the time the Spaniards got here. And there is currently a big research topic with a lot of action going on, trying to figure out why they became extinct. Because it wasn't just saber-toothed tigers, you know, it was giant sloths, and it was horses, and it was camels, and it was, you know, I'm forgetting now what they all were, but there was a whole fauna, what the biologists call megafauna, meaning large animals. And they disappeared about the time of the end of the last ice age. And there have traditionally been two views of why this happened. One put it down to climate change, end of the ice ages, you know. But that isn't a very good one, because there had been lots of ice ages before that began and ended and the animals didn't become extinct. So that was the original one. In the last 20 or 30 years, the most favored view has been that they were overhunted by the Native Americans. I mean, picture this. In the old world, people and large animals kind of evolved together, so that the large animals kind of grew up knowing that we're a particularly nasty little predator that you want to stay away from. But the ones that were in this country didn't know about that, and so when the Native Americans showed up and started hunting them, you know, I guess the animals didn't have anybody to be afraid of, and they should have been afraid. So that's the traditional view. There's now a third alternative, and that is there is some evidence, it's shaky, but there's some evidence for an impact of a large object on or near North America. And so there are people now who are arguing that the extinction of the North American land animals was like the extinction of the dinosaurs, only not on as large a scale. Yeah, Matt?
That one is really disputed, though.
You're absolutely right. It's strongly disputed. The evidence is subtle and difficult to obtain, and is very strongly disputed. So if you want some fun, you want to go to a meeting where the two sides are duking it out, and you'll find out that science is not always well behaved and mannerly. There are some really ferocious arguments amongst these people. I'm a little bit caught up in it. I'm on neither side. I've been sort of asked to be a kind of a neutral referee, and boy, I tell you, it's hard. Okay, So that's the history of life in California. But if you go back in the middle of the right, there is a relief map of California. And we could ask, we won't today because it would take us out of the direction, but we could ask, why is California, say, from about Bakersfield north, why is it divided into these three different topographic provinces that you can see so clearly there? The Coast Range on the west side, and we live in the Coast Range, so those of you who are sitting right there can look up maybe and see some of the Coast Range. We were looking at it off the balcony. Then there's the Great Valley, which is such great flat agricultural land, and then there's the Sierras on the other side. Why is that? And so a geological historian would be interested in that and could tell you what we currently think are the reasons for that threefold division. And then, of course, what brought so many Americans from the East Coast here in 1849 was the gold rush. So you could ask, why was there gold in the Sierra Nevada? And that would be another geological question that you could ask. And you could even ask then, why was there any gold at all there in a universe that started with only hydrogen and helium? And you know the answer to that one right now. Okay, so any thoughts, questions on this? Is sort of setting up some questions to talk about. I want to go on and talk about them. Do you have anything before we go on this? Okay, well, why don't you turn over to the next side? Well, what you'll find out, what you're about to find out, is that your professor is kind of a nut about medieval Spanish history. I love it. I just absolutely find it fascinating. I just can't read enough about it. And I want to try to, I want to show you now why it is that this fascinates me so much and what relevance it has for us today. You would think maybe it doesn't have any relevance. I think it has a lot of relevance. So let's look at the stage in which this drama takes place in the upper left. So there's the peninsula that includes Spain and Portugal, and that peninsula as a whole is often called Iberia. So Iberia means Spain plus Portugal, and when you look at that, you'll see over on the left-hand side, the sort of the southwest portion of it is Portugal. That's this funny little north-south strip of a country, kind of almost like a mini Chile, right? And I think people look at that and they say, what's that doing there? I mean, why isn't that whole peninsula Spain? Why is there a funny little little strip of a country like Portugal there, speaking its own language that's different from Spanish? And what we'll find out as we go on is that Portugal is not an anomaly so much as it's a geographical and historical fossil. It's a fossil of it's the only portion that's left of what Iberia looked like in the Middle Ages, when there were a bunch of different countries there, a bunch of different kingdoms. And they all got absorbed by Spain except for Portugal. So it's a fossil, right? Okay, so here's what I want to focus on some themes in medieval Spanish history, maybe a particular theme, and that's going to be the difference between two views of what was going on in Spain in the Middle Ages, one of which was called Reconquista, and the other was called Convivencia. And these are going to be really important for understanding the Spanish heritage of California. So if you wish to understand your state in real depth, this is something you need to know something about. So what are these? Okay. We need to look at these maps here. So in the lower right are maps from 3 times in the Middle Ages, 700, 1000, 1100, and 1248. And what you see in 700 is that Spain was Visigothic. Now, who are the Visigoths? Anybody know who they were? Well, yes, Wes.
Conquered Rome.
They did. So these were one of the Germanic tribes who basically took out the Roman Empire around 400, 500, 600, something like that. So you're probably aware of the Germanic invasions, how Rome had been an empire. It looked like it was stable, it was set, it was going to last forever. It ran the entire Mediterranean world. All of North Africa was Roman. All of what's now the Eastern Mediterranean, the Middle East, was Roman. Turkey, Greece, Italy, Spain, France, part of England, they were all part of the Roman Empire under the great Roman emperors like Trajan and Hadrian. And the whole thing fell apart in say the 5th century, let's say the 400s. And one of those Germanic tribes that did the job on Rome was the Visigoths. There was another group of Goths called the Ostrogoths, but the Visigoths, just look them up and see what their adventurous track, their path through the Roman Empire was. It was just amazing, the migration that they had, beating up on the Romans every chance they got. And as Wes said, actually sacking Rome at one point in 410. These are all AD, or Common Era dates. And then ending up in Spain. So by about 500 thereabout, the Visigoths were in charge of Spain. They had kicked out the Romans who had been there, and they ran the place. Okay? What happened next? What happened in Spain next? Anybody know? Well, there was another group that were tougher and more organized and more effective than the Visigoths. And those were the Muslims. Because in 632, this was the death of Muhammad in what is now Saudi Arabia. And it released an explosion of military activity in which the Muslims just swept everything before them over a huge area. They took over much of the Roman world. They also took over Persia and got all the way across North Africa. You know where we are? Let's see. Where's a good map? Well, I won't mess with that. They came across North Africa through Egypt, through Libya, through Tunisia, through Algeria, all these places that are in the news these particular times, into Morocco. And then they crossed over into Spain and faced the Visigoths. And this was a year that you might want to remember. It's an easy one to remember. It's the same as a convenience store. It was 7-Eleven. There's one you can remember easily, right? And in 7-Eleven, a rather small group of Muslims crossed the Straits of Gibraltar. And the leader was a guy, this you don't need to remember, but it's kind of interesting. This leader was a guy named Tariq. Okay? Do you know the word for mountain in Arabic? It's Jebel, right? G-E-B-E-L. So Jebel, the mountain of Tariq, the first mountain that he saw when he crossed the straits, was Gibraltar. So Gibraltar, the name comes from Mountain of Tariq, and he was the guy who came over and in one battle defeated the Visigothic army. The Visigoths just completely collapsed in the year of 711, just gone. And so the Arabs and Berbers, who were the Muslim army, simply swept up all of Spain in a matter of about 7 years. It was just an incredible conquest. And even got into France. They were turned back in France, but they ended up with most of Iberia. And so now if you look on the upper right map, this is the year 1000. At this point, I've got crosses for the Christian parts and and crescent moons for the Muslim part. But you can see there was an Islamic caliphate. A caliph was the descendant, the leader who came in direct line from Muhammad. So this was at this point was a time in which Spain was, operating at the very top of the Islamic world. You can see now there's a certain fringe across the northern side there of little Christian kingdoms. And I'm sorry they're so hard to read, but on the left it says Asturias, Leon, and then NAV is for Navarre, and then there's Aragon and Catalunya, which is the province of where Barcelona is. So there was this little fringe across there, and earlier on it had been smaller. But these countries were now starting to expand southward at the expense. They were gradually reconquering the area that the Muslims had held. And that's the meaning of reconquista, reconquest. So it's a fundamental theme in Spanish history. It's that the Muslims conquered Iberia in 7 years, and it took 800 years for the Christians to get it all back. So you can see who was more effective at that at any rate. And so that's one theme. And here's how I'd like you to think about that. That theme in Spanish history is a theme of conflict, of conflict between two great religions, Christianity and Islam. And there was also a lot of Jews in Spain, so there was a smaller Jewish group that was kind of caught in the crossfire between these two. But maybe a good way to start thinking about that is that over that 800 years, from about 700 to about 1500, the Christians gradually pushed their way south like that, at the expense of the Muslims, until finally the last Muslim kingdom was conquered in a year that you already know. What was that? 1492. An incredible year in Spanish history, because both the conquest of the last Muslim kingdom and the discovery of America took place in 1492, and so did about 4 other major events that we'll come back to later. I mean, that's the year to know in Spanish history, along with 7/11, right? Okay, so Reconquista is a historical theme of conflict, of warfare, of intolerance, of fanaticism. And you might think, well, it has some application to today, Same religious groups are still at it. So the other one I want you to think about is a different theme that is called convivencia, which means living together. And the point here is that medieval Spanish history, or Iberian history, was not simply one of conflict. It was that. But it was also one of these 3 great religions living in the same peninsula, rubbing shoulders in the same towns for all those centuries, with various degrees of harmony and various degrees of fanatic dislike of each other, with awful things that happened. But it kind of is the other side of the coin, and maybe this is why it's so relevant to us today, living in a world where those 3 religions and 2 or 3 others are in conflict with each other. Maybe Iberia in the Middle Ages was a microcosm of that. And so right now, if you read about these 2 things, convivencia and Reconquista, what you will see is that historians who are interested in this time and place are very far from agreement about which was more important at any given time. Was convivencia or Reconquista more important? So I meant to bring along, I'll try to get you this, I meant to bring along a couple of recent books that make a very favorable case For convivencia, they talk about how Christian and Jewish scholars were welcome in the courts of the Muslim kings, and how Christian kings had Muslim courtiers and they worked together, and how the architecture of the Iberian Peninsula is a melding of the architecture of all three of those. It's a very popular theme right now because it offers some hope for us in a world in which religious conflict is just at the surface or just below it in so many places. But there's another side to it. There are other historians who think that that's absolute rubbish. So, for example, last weekend, Millie and I went to San Francisco to a symposium about medieval Toledo, which was the capital of Spain in this time. And we listened to a historian named Teófilo Ruiz, who's a professor of Spanish history at Southern Branch, UCLA. And he thinks that this sort of romanticizing of convivencia is just complete rubbish, and gave one example after another of how really bad things were. So there are these two viewpoints, and I don't pretend to know enough to say which one was right. But this is something we'll come back to as we go on today and think about how you may wish to interpret the history of whatever you're interested in. And there will be lots of different interpretations. Don't feel in studying history of any kind that you will eventually find out what the answer is. What will happen as you get deeper into it is that you will discover different interpretations, and you will understand them with greater and greater depth and sophistication, and you'll be able to say, well, maybe here's what sounds right to me about this interpretation, that convivencia was important. But I also understand what Ruiz was saying, that was nonsense. Yeah, Michelle? Thanks for asking a question, yeah.
So about the convivencia and how did that Luis professor talk about, did he mention anything about the architectural coalescing?
Yeah, he did talk about the architecture. Let me just expand on that for a moment, because thank you for sort of pointing us in that direction. The upper right is a picture of a little church from Toledo. I'm going to show you some more about Toledo in a moment. But this is a church of San Roman, and this was built as a Christian church. It was not a mosque that was taken over and turned into a church, which happened in many places. This was actually built by Christians after the Christian takeover of Toledo. But if you look at that, you'll see sort of, it's pretty hard to see in here, the original is easier, but you can see there are Islamic arches there, the kind of horseshoe arches that were very characteristic of mosques. And then there's Arabic script all over it. And this is a remarkable thing. Why would a Christian in the Middle Ages build a church and put Arabic script on the walls? That makes no sense at all, does it? But it's what Michelle was referring to. There was this fusion. In fact, one of the speakers at the symposium said that it was not that Christians were building in an Islamic style. It's that everybody was building in an Iberian style. And so there were synagogues that were made at the same time, which had the same kind of what we now think of as Islamic architecture, but in fact it was a sort of a syncretism. It was a blending of the styles by all the people who were building in the Iberian Peninsula in the Middle Ages. So he spoke about that, Michelle. He said that, sure, that was going on, but you could borrow or steal somebody's artistic and architectural ideas without treating them right? And so then he gave some examples, which I'm going to try to get to in a moment, of a great king who is sometimes portrayed as the kind of the essence of convivencia. And what Ruiz showed was that there was some of that, but there was also an awful lot of intolerance and persecution going on under this same king. Okay? When Millie and I were in Spain about 3 years ago, sort of finding out about these things, tracking him down, we took San Roman in Toledo as our sort of symbol of convivencia. And then in the lower left, we took this castle called Calatrava la Nueva as our symbol of Reconquista. And this was right on the boundary for 100 years or so, right on the boundary, the epicenter of conflict between Christians and Muslims. And this was a mean place. You know, I know a lot about rocks, and so I immediately recognized that this thing is built of quartzite. Now, if any of you know about quartzite, it is the hardest, toughest, meanest, sharpest rock you can imagine. Now, and they built the whole thing out of that because that's what was around. But if you're walking around on quartzite and you slip and catch yourself with your hand, well, at the very least you have a lacerated hand and probably you have broken bones all over. This is really mean stuff. And it was sort of symbolic of this. And this was the castle of a group of Christian knights, the Order of Calatrava. And these were guys whose job it was to go out and fight the Muslims, who had their own equivalent on the other side. But this was a place that was just full of fanatics. Man, I tell you, you find out about the history of Calatrava la Nueva, and you see it's the other side of the coin from San Roman. It's tough and mean in a way that you would hardly believe. Okay, so should we turn over to the next one? And now let me be more specific about how the things I'm telling you now, which are sort of my experience in digging into a historical question, how these things might go into whatever project you're working on. And so this is something from a year or two ago. I've updated a little bit, but at any rate, you might think about the time scale of what you're interested in now. Some of you were interested in things that were very, very recent, so pop culture kind of things, right? And if you're looking at that, you're going to be not in the human history, which is barely visible up there, but you're in the last tiny little shaving of that, right? So it might be a good idea to think how you can expand your topic backward. And again, take the case of cats. Don't just stop with one breed of modern cats, but go back to try to understand how cats became domesticated, and maybe beyond that, why are there different breeds of cats? You know, all those ones that Macintosh names their operating systems after, you know, leopard and snow leopard and lion and all those things. Why are all those breeds of cats? Okay. Now, the next thing, and I think you'll work on this a lot with Ryan and David, is acquiring some techniques, trying to find ways that you can build up the information and make it other than just a whole lot of series of notes on pages. So one thing that I've found really valuable is to build up databases. And if you have Excel on your computer, you can make a database on Excel. There also are commercially available database programs like FileMaker, and I think there are some. Does anybody know? Aren't there some freeware and shareware, things like that? Look around. It's good. If you haven't used a database program, it's a really good way of assembling the information that you're trying to learn and make sense out of it. So here's a real simple database in the middle left, and what I've done is write down there some rulers of Castile. And now, look in the map just underneath. Let's make sure we know about Castile. Okay, so here's the situation in 1100 AD. So we're part way through the Reconquista. As you can see, the Muslims still own essentially the southern half of Spain, or the southeastern half, and the Christians are in the northwestern half. And Castile is that sort of central portion there, the middle cross there. Now, just to explain something I was saying about earlier, look at the pattern there in 1100. Can you see that there's Muslim Spain in the south, and then there are a series of kingdoms. There are 6 of them across there. There's Portugal in the west, Asturias, Leon, then there's Castile, then there's, what does that say? Does that say Nav? It should be Navarre. It may have another name at that time. But that's essentially the Basques are living in that area. And then there's Aragon. And finally, there's Catalunya, which is the region of Barcelona. And remember that earlier on, the Christians had only owned a little narrow swath across the northern part. But they're gradually pushing down here. And each of those little kingdoms across the top is sort of pushing straight down, right? The only one that didn't do that was Navarre, because it was kind of caught up. It didn't have any place to go. It was hemmed in. But the others are all pushing south. And I think you can imagine what happens over the next couple of hundred years is they push farther and farther south. And so now you can see why Portugal is shaped like it is. It is not only a geographic fossil, it's a record of the Reconquista moving south, with the Portuguese taking the western swath, the Castilians taking the center swath, and Aragon taking the eastern part. And if all of those countries had remained viable, had remained independent, then Iberia today would just look like a series of vertical stripes going down, wouldn't it? But what happened was that Castile was able to take over all of the others eventually. And so Spain right now, the country of Spain, is Castile plus the various other former kingdoms which it annexed. And they darn nearly got Portugal, not quite, because there was a great battle there in the 14th century, and against all odds, the Portuguese cleaned up on the Castilians and were able to stay independent. So when you look at a map there, the map itself is a historical document telling you something about what happened in the Middle Ages. And there's something I have to mention here because I think it is so fascinating. As these Christian countries moved southward, and they really had a head of steam going, they didn't want to spend too much time fighting each other, which they would obviously, they would prefer to spend their time fighting the Muslims, but if they didn't have an agreement ahead of time, then they would fight over what they had just reconquered, right? And so there was a tradition that developed of signing treaties ahead of time, dividing up the Muslim territory that was yet to be conquered or was about to be conquered, right? And that was a habit, and that explains something that you may have run into, which otherwise is utterly incomprehensible. And that is 2 years after Columbus discovered North America, and the Portuguese were already all over Africa and the Indian Ocean, Portugal and Spain, or Castile in that time, signed a treaty at a place called Tordesillas. It was in 1494, and that is the treaty you may have heard about in which Spain and Portugal divided up the world. And basically the Portuguese got everything east of a line that now runs through Brazil, and the Spanish got everything to the west of it. Now what chutzpah, have you ever heard of the brass that it takes for two countries off on the corner of Europe to divide up the world between them? Well, you understand that if you know about the preceding habit, which was to divide up the Muslim territory ahead of time. So that's what they were doing, as how they had the idea to do that. Okay, let's look at some of these kings, because they're sort of interesting. You look what I've got there. I've got the names. This one, now remember, you always look for the direction. This one runs from older at the top to younger at the bottom, and you can see from the dates there that this runs from 1035 to 1284. So there's about 250 years worth of kings there. And some of them had a sort of a short and disappointing reigns, Enrique I only reigned for 3 years. Sancho III reigned for 1 year. That's, God, how disappointing to become King of Spain and then die in a year. That's, well, you never know what's going to happen. But I want to tell you briefly about 4 of them who are really significant. So the first one is Alfonso VI. And he was the Christian king who took Toledo. And now it's time to tell you about Toledo. So let me show you this. There it is. Okay, this is the one we started with. Did you see that? What do I do here? That one? Is this okay for just a minute? We won't be on this very long. Okay, so this is a crater on the moon. And the name of the crater is Alphonsus. And it happens to be named after King Alfonso X. Actually, I'm getting ahead of my story, aren't I? Because we're talking about Alfonso VI at this point. So let me just show you a tiny bit about the stage where all of this is happening. So here is Europe, and this is showing the elevation. So the highest area is the Alps, and Switzerland is the country with the highest average topography. Spain over here has the second highest average topography. It's not really so much mountains as it's a high plateau. It's very dry. When you cross from fertile, wet France into dry, arid, tough Spain, you've made a major change. And here's the question. Why is Spain so high? This is a major topic among geological and geophysical research right now. I'm quite involved in it, and I can report to you we really don't know. But it's got to be something significant, and a lot of people are trying to figure out why. At any rate, this is called the Meseta. This is the high plateau of Spain, and right in the center of it is this city called Toledo. There. So you can see again, this is topography coded. So these are low areas down here and there, but there's this great big area up in the center of Spain, which is a high plateau. And this is Toledo. So it has been really important as the capital of Spain, or it was for centuries. It's not now, of course, Madrid is. But let me show you a little tiny bit about it. Here's what it looks like. So this is the royal palace, and there's a cathedral. The tower's just out of sight there. But this is the river that flows around it, and it flows around in a great big loop. And you can see why this was a great spot to have a capital city in Roman times, in Visigothic times, in medieval times, because it was very defensible. It had this nice sort of natural moat that went around 3 sides. Anybody know this picture? Anybody seen this? This is El Greco's painting of Toledo. It's very, very famous. He was the most important artist who lived in Toledo. But here's what it looks like in a map from Google Maps, and you can see the river. Well, the river comes along here, and it flows around in this big loop like that. So it basically protects this town on 3 sides, and right across here, of course, were fortifications. And this was sitting on a bunch of granite. It was perfect stronghold. So the Visigoths made this their capital, and then it was a Muslim capital of a smaller Muslim kingdom, and then eventually the Christians took it, and it was taken. If you want to learn something about Spanish medieval history, you should know 1085, which is another really critical date. That's a date in which King Alfonso VI captured Toledo and made it his capital. And it was the capital then of Castile for a long, long time. But it's not now. And there's geologic history behind that. When Spain became very important, after the conquest of Granada in 1492, the discovery of the New World, Spain was the most powerful kingdom in Europe. And they just needed a bigger capital. And so the king at the time, Philip II, said, we just can't do it. You can expand out this way a little bit, but you're just basically surrounded by this river. So he moved it up to a town of no importance whatsoever, but in the middle of a big flat plain where they could expand, and that was Madrid. So Madrid has been the capital ever since, and the beauty of it is that as a result, Toledo is almost fossilized, as it hasn't been all built over with modern buildings and government offices and things like that. It's got kind of left the way it was. in 1660 when the capital was moved to Madrid. Okay, so this is where a lot of this stuff happens, a lot of this this history. Okay, so that's Alfonso VI capturing Toledo. Then there was, under Alfonso VIII, there was a tremendous battle that it would be helpful for you to have heard of. It was called the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa, and it's shown on the little map down there. And it was the battle that essentially broke the Islamic hold on Iberia. And after that point, it was clear that Spain was eventually going to become entirely Christian. It took quite a while to do it. But that was the turning point battle. It was in 1212, and I think the first time I got interested in this was, I don't know, I was in college or something. I was reading an interesting little book called The Battles That Changed History. And this was one of the dozen or so battles that were taken as having utterly changed history. And had that not happened, you know, had Iberia continued to be a battleground between these two religions on and on and on, someone else would have explored the Americas, not the Spanish. So, in a sense, we have a state all full of Spanish place names and Spanish campuses of our university because of that battle. So that was the battle. That was won by Alfonso VIII, and Millie and I visited his tomb in Burgos, and that was his that is his casket and that of his queen in the lower right. And somehow it was, I had been interested in that battle for so long that to actually stand there right close to that was really a profound experience for me. Okay, so then he was followed by Henry I, who had this short little reign, and then came a king called Saint Ferdinand, or Fernando III, or San Fernando. So that's where your valley comes from, those of you who are from that area. And why is he a saint? Why would a king of Spain be a saint? Well, I don't think it was from giving alms to the poor. I don't think this guy was a Mother Teresa kind of a character. This guy was a ferocious warrior. And he sort of wrapped up the possibilities from Las Navas de Tolosa and captured the three of the greatest Muslim cities that were remaining. First of all, Córdoba, which had been the capital of all of Muslim Spain, and then Jaén, and then Sevilla, which was the greatest of all of the cities in the south at the time. So this guy got to be a saint by conquering people who had a different belief system than he did. And this was a great thing for the papacy to get these great cities kind of handed in your lap, so they made him a saint. So think about that next time you go home and you're in the San Fernando Valley. And then the last guy I want to tell you about is his son, who's Alfonso X. In Spanish, known as El Sabio, which could be translated as the wise or the learned. And so you would think, as a college professor, that's my kind of a king. I'm not much up for guys that go out and conquer cities, but a learned, wise king, that's my kind of a guy. And so I want to tell you about him in this last few remaining moments, because I think he gives you a really good example of how hard it is to make a judgment about things that have happened in history. So turn over to the last page now. And here's Alfonso X. When I first heard about him, I thought, well, I want to know all about him. Why is he called wise and learned? And I discovered some great things about this king. So he was interested, among other things, he was very well educated. He was interested in codifying the law. So some of you will become lawyers, perhaps. And you will probably study this Spanish law code that's called the Siete Partidas. More or less it means the law code in 7 parts. But we're talking now Middle Ages when the law was kind of roughshod and not very well organized and focused. This guy, Alfonso X, was responsible for the drawing up of this codification of the laws of Spain. And one thing I found out on the web last night when I was looking this up is that in the United States Capitol, in the wing of the House of Representatives, there are statues of, I don't know, a handful, maybe a dozen or so, of great people from the past who have been responsible for great law codes. And one of those is Alfonso X, because of this Siete Partidas, and that's actually important in this country. In some of the southwestern states, still their law codes have a lot of stuff from the Siete Partidas in it. Okay, then the next thing is that he had this luminous court, and it's said that in the court that they used Latin as the language for religious matters. They used Spanish for matters of law. They used Arabic for science, and they used Portuguese for poetry and music. So this was a really sophisticated court, and the Portuguese at the time wrote the best songs, the best poetry, and so the music that I played you when you first came in was one of the songs from a great collection. I forget whether it's 200 or 400 or something like that, songs that were commissioned by King Alfonso X, and they're called the Cantigas de Santa Maria. And if you ever get interested in medieval music, this will be one of the things that you'll definitely want to find out about. He was also very interested in astronomy, and what was important in astronomy in those days was tables that told you where the planets and the sun and the moon had been at different times in the past. And so previously the best tables had been prepared in Toledo maybe 100 years earlier, but Alfonso commissioned astronomers, mostly Islamic astronomers, to make a new set of tables. Those are called the Alphonsine tables after Alfonso. And the crater that was on the screen up here is a lunar crater that's named Alphonsus and is named after King Alfonso X. Great guy, you know, everything that you would want in a king. Except, as Professor Ruiz said 2 days ago, he was a terrible king. He was just the worst king you could possibly imagine. He was really good at intellectual things, and he just wasn't good at being a king. So he wasted enormous amounts of his time, his effort, the money of his kingdom trying to become the Holy Roman Emperor, which was the most prestigious title. This was the Roman Empire of the Germans at the time. And he just put enormous effort into it, as a result of which the country ended up kind of impoverished. Then he created something that was called the Mesta. And the Mesta was like a union or a consortium of people who ran sheep and ran cattle. You see where this is going? La Cañada, remember, that was a sheep track or a cattle trail. And that had become really important because in the process of the Reconquista, they had gotten rid of an awful lot of the people who lived in the Arabic parts of Spain, and it was depopulated. About all you could do was to run cattle. And so the Spaniards basically invented that. Where do you suppose Americans from places like England and France learned how to be cowboys? They learned from the Spaniards who knew how to do it. Why do you have names? You know what names like, you know, the lariat? That lariat is that lasso that you throw. That comes from la reata, which is a rope in Spanish. And yet, as a process of doing this, they ended up with all sorts of bad effects. The Mesta ended up with much too much power. There were economic problems. He debased the coinage, which means you stop making it out of so much gold, you put other metals in it. And it wrecked the economy. He feuded with the nobles all the time, and he died defeated and deserted, essentially kicked out by his own son, who couldn't stand it any longer, leaving a heritage of civil war. So my point there is, when you come to the point of judging historical figures, historical episodes, it's not going to be easy. You're going to end up with cases like Alfonso X, who was good in one sense, bad in another. How do you make a judgment about it? The only thing I would say is, when you make your judgment, try not to say, I wish it had been otherwise. If you say, I wish Alfonso X had been an entirely good king, if you're somebody with Hispanic heritage like some of us, you wouldn't be here. Because things would have unfolded in a different way. And probably nobody in this room would have been here. Because one of the things we'll come to at the very end of the course is how entirely dependent what happens is on the most tiny little, nearly random events that happened in a long time in the past. So I think Alfonso was a great scientific king. He was a terrible ruler king. But if he hadn't been just what he was, we wouldn't be here. See you on Thursday.